Om, 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 om. Oh, honestly unbalanced.
Did you ever think that you would have a business kind of called Yoga Medicine that is touching people around the globe with a charitable foundation? Was that ever on the radar? And what were your expectations of what you'd end up doing?
No, that's the easy answer. I think it was one of those things that kind of builds over time. You know, I'm definitely someone who has goals and plans, but absolutely not. You know, you think back to those times and you're like, gosh, how did I get here? Yeah, it's a long road though. So.
On that note of kind of goals, I almost feel like from what you've said there, you've got kind of goals, but they're kind of, or direction, but loosely held. And it's a time of year where people are setting goals and saying, I need to do this, I need to achieve this and alike. And I guess what's your approach to that? Do you set like objective goals and stick to them whatever the cost, you know, or are you constantly adapting? And then how would you find the balance between moving in a direction, but equally being flexible enough to change, but also staying committed at the same time?
Yeah, I definitely set goals, and it's different every year. Sometimes they're like more broad and vague, and sometimes they're very specific. Like this year, it's definitely more broad. I'm focusing on brain, which is mental health and Alzheimer's prevention.
Is that your brain? Is that on a personal level, or is that?
Yeah, that's my goals this year. I mean, my dad went into memory care, so it's very present in my life right now. And so, yeah, so sometimes it's very general things like that. And sometimes it's very specific, measurable. For me, what's important is making goals. You know, New Year's is just a great time to reset. You get that momentum of everyone kind of having goals and resolutions. But for me, I have like a thing in my phone calendar that repeats at the beginning of every month. So I check in and I recalculate those goals. If it seems like things are going in a different direction, I'm changing it or, adapting it to what feels relevant. So it's not like it's set. And if I don't hit it, it's a bad thing. It's just like, if it's not going in that direction, then I need to shift and find what I want to be doing. And, I think it's malleable, but it's also very specific. It's also about, I think, getting goals that are realistic and attainable. And, you have that, like when you have really big goals, it just takes, the one step and then the next step and then the next step. You still have to take steps to get there. So it helps break it down.
You said in one of your recent Instagram posts actually about how you were wanting to go into this year with a bit of a slower, steadier pace. So I'm just wondering, did anything inspire you to slow down a little bit?
Yeah. Oh, yes. My dog passed away, and it definitely was like a reset button for me. I think things change. We have these big events in our life, whether that's a passing of a family member or a pet or my dad going into memory care. Life is always changing, whether you're 12 and you're thinking about your grandparents or great grandparents, or you're in your 40s or 50s and thinking about yourself or your parents. I think it creates that opening and that awareness to then step back and recalibrate what's important. Like we get so lost in our to-do lists and the motions of our lives. I feel like it's really important to step back and take that perspective.
You also talk a little bit about, I can't remember where I read it, but you said something about uncertainty. And I was thinking about this concept because us as humans, we're generally terrible at being with feelings of uncertainty and not knowing what's coming up in the future. So how do you manage feelings of uncertainty? And has this changed a lot for you over your years of yoga practice?
That's a hard one. I mean, I think that's difficult regardless of where you are in your yoga practice. I know in terms of the last few decades of my life practicing yoga, it's been ups and downs. But I think the key for me is just leaning in, surrendering. I mean, realizing that there's some greater force than us out there, regardless of what your beliefs are, spiritual or religious, or even atheists. I think we can all agree that there's something bigger than us and that's out of our control. And being someone who loves to plan and everything in its place, it's an important reminder, that, okay, well, it's out of my control, and the surrender phase of our practice, which is sometimes the most challenging.
You said, I read, I don't know if it was a blog post but you said that joy was the whole game, not the end game. Do you remember saying that at some point or writing that? Joy was a whole game.
We're going through all the emotions.
I'm sure I did.
Yeah, so you were saying, so joy was a whole game, like the end game, and it reminded me of a story. It was kind of like it's the idea that there's a little fishing spot on a beautiful lake in America. A businessman goes to this fisherman and says to him, "Oh, you've got a really nice little setup here. You know, you're renting your fishing rods out. Maybe you could actually build a bigger shack and start to charter some boats and build a big business, and then you'll have time to do all the things you want." And he said, "But all I want to do is fish, and I can do that right now." And I kind of that really struck me in that often we want to achieve things, and actually the result of those achievements are often things that we could do kind of anyway. So does that, how have you, it sounds like you kind of brought that idea into the start of this year, that you're realizing what means something to you and slowing down and reflecting. Could you?
Well, I think that's the essence of the goals, that you come back to. The goals for me allow me to live in the process. The joy is now, right?
That's
we can't wait for the joy. We can't cultivate joy. Joy is now, it's here. And so for me, goals are one way. I mean, everyone has different things that work for them. It's a personal preference to some extent, but for me, being able to write it down and have a plan, and have the step-by-step process to get there allows me to really lean into those moments, which I think is the important part. And as we go through the decades of our lives, I think we start to appreciate more and more how important it is to take it in while you can. Like I said, I see my dad, and his reality is very different, and it just makes me remember how important it is to just keep taking in those moments and enjoying it and relishing it.
People because obviously some people really struggle to find joy, and it's beautiful that you say, joy is here now. But for someone that really does struggle, how do you sort of have any tips or any exercises that you could suggest to someone who would love to tap into that feeling of joy, but just doesn't know how to?
I think it's a tough one. I mean, to be honest, I know for myself, I went through a pretty dark, depressive phase after my dog passed, and with everything with my dad. And, I think it's just finding it all the small things. For me, yoga is such a great way to tap into it, because I personally feel a lot of joy just feeling my blood pumping through my veins and feeling that I have the privilege of being able to move and breathe and step through this life and breathe into it and take it in. And even the privilege just to take an hour out of my day or a half hour out of my day to move and breathe. I mean, I know you guys have a baby, so you probably
not so much at the moment.
10 minutes maybe.
Yeah. This is kind of linked quite nicely into, because I really wanted to ask you a bit about gratitude, and I feel like what you described right there is practicing gratitude to access joy, which I find to be a really powerful practice, and it's quite instantaneous actually. You don't really have to dig around too hard to find something to be grateful for, and then the joy naturally comes from that place. So you speak a little bit about the science behind gratitude. And I know that a lot of people out there think, oh yeah, whatever, I'm thankful for my life. But there is actually a science behind it and how it changes the brain. Would you be open to explaining a little bit about it?
I'm a huge fan, and I think a lot of people are, of gratitude. I mean, I know our brain is so hardwired toward the negatives, toward the threats, toward that response of, the threats that are around us all the time now, that are taking care of babies or dogs or parents or managing our schedules. And so I think our brains are just so hardwired for the negatives that we really have to be able to reinforce the positives. And it does take some conscious maneuvering. And I think gratitude for me, though, is one of those words that can fall a little flat. Like there's some of these cliches that we talk about all the time. And so, for me, what's most important is just feeling into that sense of gratitude or appreciation. Like I said, same thing, like for this life, for this breath, for these moments, the seconds you get between naps or during naps. I don't know if that's what you were asking, but.
Well, I was just interested in a little bit of the science behind it, because I'm terrible at explaining science. I hear it and I find it interesting, but then it just never lands for me. But you're explaining a little bit about it on your Instagram. But don't worry if you don't remember it.
It's funny because I feel like everyone thinks I'm so smart. You guys too, right? But the reality is our brains are so one segmented. You ask me these things and I have all these different categories in my brain. But you know what? I think we're all such brilliant brains, and our society has this way of thinking that because we can pass tests or do certain types of information better than others, that we're smarter. But the reality is each one of us has spent every second or every hour that waking hour of every day filling our brains with something, whether that's how to best take care of our child, how to best take care of our body. My life has been full of how to best take care of my body and my mind and support my patients and students with practices. And, we're all rich with these life experiences and intelligence. It's just a matter of finding a way to connect to that. So yes, it's there somewhere in some compartment of my brain.
Don't worry, I totally understand like brain fog at the moment. I'm surprised I managed to string any sentences together today.
My students having an awful time at the moment. It's like when you lack sleep, you think you're fine, don't you?
Yeah.
You don't realise.
Oh my gosh.
I heard maybe Matthew Walker was saying that the percentage of the population that can function well on less than 8 hours sleep is rounded to the nearest whole number, 0%.
Wow.
And I think I'm performing well in class, not realising I'm like lefts and rights all over the place. And I'm going to jump into Shavasana. In fact, on that note, maybe we can talk a little bit about cueing. I know you had a chat with people recently about cueing. And I had this chat actually with a physio, like one of the UK's leading kind of clinical physios, about instructions he might give. And the idea being that we might know certain cues to be inaccurate, like from an anatomical perspective, like breathe into the belly, like what does that mean from an anatomical perspective? But is it the language our students need to hear to kind of vaguely get them to do a particular action? And there is a balance to be found. And I always think this is hard when yoga teachers get more knowledge. Sometimes I've seen then they teach a class that is completely inaccessible. They're talking about muscles and ligaments that students perhaps have no idea.
To show off.
Not to show off. It's more just to use it, to use a knowledge they've acquired, but not realizing then it becomes inaccessible to the average student that does one yoga class a week.
Yeah.
So I just wondered, what's your view on, I guess, inaccurate anatomical cues that aren't dangerous, but that get students to do a thing that you want them to do?
I totally agree. I mean, I think for me, I like to train our teachers to be able to understand it, but understanding it's just half of it. Then I need to be able to translate it into something that's also succinct, because in a yoga class, there's so many different things. This is why I love yoga, is there's so many different lenses you can look at the practice and the body through, and the mind through, and the energetic body through. And so, I think for me, it's helpful in yoga medicine, we try and teach our teachers to just have some sort of purpose, even if that's just a well-rounded class or lymphatics or, whatever that might be, to have some sort of focus so that you can have clarity in that. Otherwise, you're kind of all over the place. But then being able to translate it into a language that's meaningful to your students. And, if you travel, that's like, that's also very different. So I'm watching how things land, what's translating well and what's not. If I have a community that I'm teaching to at home, then I might be more familiar with what's landing for the majority of people. And you're never going to have things that land with everyone. Some people are tuning out. Some people might have English as their second language. Some people might just translate things differently. We all translate words in a different way that's meaningful to us. And so for me, it's important that our teachers understand the body, but the other half is being able to translate it in a way that's relevant and meaningful. And I agree. I mean, I think breathe into your belly is such an easy way to talk about it. And if I can be succinct, that's precious. If I can be succinct and be able to paint a big picture, make something complex really simple with a few words that aren't totally accurate, who cares? I'm trying to create, I often think of it like healing maps, towards from one point to one point. At the beginning of the practice, I feel this way. At the end, I want to feel this way, or I want to work on this thing. And so I'm creating a map of how to get there. And it might not be explaining every muscle and joint detail or detail of that system, but I want to take them on a road to get to that place. So, it's an interesting topic.
Are there any cues that you maybe, let's say on your advanced trainings, where people have come from perhaps a different lineage, and you hear them using certain cues, they haven't done your foundational training, they've only done only doing the advanced with you, that you catch and like, actually, no, that is potentially injurious, giving that cue. Don't, like common cues, all the common analogies, like in Baddha Konasana, open your feet like the pages of a book.
You love that one, don't you?
Common cues or cues you hear, or I for me, I hate the word sink into. Whenever I hear anyone say sink into unless it's Shavasana, I hate that.
Oh, that's funny.
But is there anything that you think, that sets off alarm bells? But that's the thing,
is like everyone has their things that drive them crazy. And there's no way to know it all. And even like when we talk about trauma, everyone has very different triggers and there's no way to know. There's obviously some that are more common that you might avoid, but there's no way of knowing. I mean, you kind of have to stick to your lane as a teacher, I think, to decide what's valuable to you. But as far as, in teacher trainings, I actually rarely teach in quotes specific cues. What I really like to do is teach our teachers how to understand the body. And then because we do have teachers from all over the world, they then go and translate into language that's meaningful for them. Like even tuck the tailbone, like there was a long wave of, negativity around that, which I agree with. I think for a while at the beginning, no one, like in the 90s, people didn't really know how to access their core that much. And so, really exaggerating it and tucking the tailbone was interesting and helpful. And then we kind of like started getting into this flat back scenario where everyone was overly exaggerating that tucking of the tailbone and becoming really rigid. And then we kind of came away from it. But, there's still a place for it. There's still going to be people who don't know how to lengthen their tailbone or lengthen the skin of their tailbone, and it's like they need to hear tuck the tailbone. And so one, we have different bodies, and I think different things will land differently in different bodies. Two, we have different interpretations of sink into the floor, melt into the floor. Like I love that analogy.
It's more for me like sink into warrior two in kind of load bearing poses is where it gets me.
Because it's not like passive.
Yeah, I feel that in Warrior 2, when people sink into it, they're just loading. There's very little engagement going on. They're kind of
That's so interesting though, because I've not really thought of it like that before. That's sink to you. That's what that means. But for someone else, sink might be I'm actually engaging, and it might mean something. Go deeper. Yeah, exactly.
Well, and if you sink, you still have to engage. It's not that you have the opportunity, but for some people, maybe that's letting go of their tendency to clench and grip. And for others like you, it's like, no, I like to really feel strong and
that's
supported.
So interesting. Yeah, I've not thought of it like that before.
I like what you said before about, you're not teaching people cues, but teaching people more an understanding. It reminds me of that whole idea of, give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. Teach a man how to fish, and each forever. Actually teaching people to understand a pose, and everything they need is in the room based on what they can see from their students.
Yeah, that's actually something that I feel like I refer to a lot. It's really important to me to teach our teachers. My goal is to teach them to know what I know so that they can do what they need to do. They can go and apply different styles. I think there's so much beauty in the yoga world right now. There's so many great teachers and different styles and ways of doing things. What I want to do is just give our teachers the lens of the body, the physical body, the physiological body, the energetic body, so that then they can have this lens through which they can better decipher what techniques or styles or approaches might be better for certain students. Because our whole focus is really therapeutics, which for me isn't just restorative. It's really about meeting the individual. And so I have to have some different tools in my tool belt. And it's not like cookie cutter approaches really don't work that well in a therapeutic setting because everyone is so different. Every body is so different. Every interpretation is so different. And so, for me, it's really going deeper and teaching them the what, why, and how behind it so that then I'm going to give examples of how to do something, but then they can go and their brains can explode with ideas, which is fun.
Can we talk a little bit about how you decided to blend Western and Eastern medicine?
I just think there's such an important place for anatomy and physiology. I mean, I did my pre-med and went to Chinese medicine school and specialized in sports medicine. And so for me, I've always really loved the physicality. There's something about anatomy that's, I think the more you study, it's more cut and dry, but there is something that's really clear, like math about it. And so I love that part of the body, but I think there's so much more to it. And I really believe that if Krishnamacharya was around now, he would be applying, I mean, this is my opinion, of course, that he would be using those resources and applying that understanding of the body in a way that still honors and respects the lineage of yoga. I think it's so hard because we often vacillate between one far end of that spectrum and the other, like all research, which, by the way, is very limiting. If you rely on research and evidence-based research for everything, you're never going to do anything. Never. Like, you're never going to do anything, because even the best research only tells you one little thing about one point in time, about one demographic. And then it's up to you to apply that to the work that you do, especially with yoga, because there's very little great research in the yoga world because it costs millions of dollars and takes years and years to do one tiny research study. And so, I think if we wait for just the research, it's pretty dry. And so for me, it's that balance of still living in the mystery. There's so much to this. We've done this for hundreds of years. We know that there's something to it. And being able to understand it, when I can put this lens of this Western lens to it, for me at least, I can better understand when and why I might use certain techniques as we start to understand better how these things influence the body. And then, I mean, ultimately, you still just have to experiment, hopefully do no harm first, safely experiment and see what works and find what's helpful.
We're quite attached, aren't we, in the West, to knowing not just that things work, but why they work as well. And and that used to be me. I needed the why to everything. And then I read, was it penicillin or something similar to penicillin? And I didn't realize that for years, they used it as a drug, but not knowing in any way how it did what it did. and then I started to think, well, actually, Holly's sound journey, like Holly and I are quite different. Holly's more hippie, sound healing. The moon's doing this. Let's blame the moon for all of our woes. And I'm kind of like anatomical and reason and why. But then I started to think, well, with sound healing, I don't necessarily go down the route for some of the science behind it as written down. But then I started to reflect, actually, we don't need to. It clearly has a profound effect on some people. It brings them emotional insight. It brings them relaxation. We don't need to know
and the power
exactly
of
how.
The mind is so powerful as well.
And we might never know how it does what it does. And it's good to be kind of okay with that, isn't it?
There is science behind it, by the way, but
questionable.
Well, and it's fun when we do learn some of those tidbits, when like you clearly experience something. It's very obvious for people who practice yoga, whether that's whatever realm or aspect or sound baths, like it's visceral. You feel it. There's no denying that. And that is your truth. We talk about truth, and oftentimes that becomes kind of blurred, I think, with evidence-based research and science. But truth, like, think about all the people in any given research that don't respond. And the placebo effect, as far as the power of the mind. Exactly. There's a whole department of placebo at Harvard, that studies this.
And the nocebo as well, of course.
Of course, yeah. And so it's pretty mind-blowing. But it is really cool when we do learn some tidbits of that. Like, there is coherence within the fascial system. And I believe, there's a lot of lens we can look at it through, but, there's this vibration that is coherent throughout the body and is communicating. And we'll learn more, and it's fascinating.
There's a quote that's just come into my head, and it's one that I love, and I can't remember who said it, but it's truth is that which cannot be spoken in words. I feel like that just needed to be said. I like that one.
I love that. I love you guys have such a good. I love the balance of the two of you.
Yeah, we're different, but actually we're quite similar in all the right ways. But talking about kind of yoga, what you do, bridging the gap between kind of yoga and Western medicine, and I read some of the part of what you wanted to do is actually help doctors to understand what yoga could be, but also actually make sure that they are then going to teachers that maybe teach in a way that you can recommend. Because that could be the problem sometimes, can't it? That doctors are increasingly, in the UK at least, prescribing movement in a sense. I think do Tai Chi, do Pilates, just move. You need to move your body. But then sometimes kind of prescribing yoga. But doctors don't really understand the scope of what yoga could be. And then a pregnant woman who is a triathlete and they're fit, and they say, well, you should do some yoga, and suddenly turns up in like a dynamic handstand vinyasa class, having never done any yoga before or alike. And Yeah, well, I guess the question is there, like, how has that work gone? How is your contact with the medical community in terms of clinical, the doctors?
Yeah.
What do you call them in America? You don't call them the doctor that you would just see is like a family doctor. Yeah. Is it a family doctor you would call it?
Primary care, physician, doctor. I mean, doctor's a more broad one because that can include doctorates.
But I guess the question there is, how have you managed to persuade them to kind of prescribe more yoga, and what kind of yoga have you told them, and what have you told them about yoga? What does a doctor listening to this need to understand about yoga and what it could be?
Well, I think first off, anyone who's familiar at all with yoga, any healthcare provider that's familiar at all with yoga knows that referring someone to yoga is negligent, especially in the US where we have a lot of liability and malpractice, which is somewhat everywhere, but especially here, because they could end up doing handstands, they could end up in Ashtanga, they could end up in Yin, they could end up in chanting, or, like all of which could be positive or negative for certain people. And so because I think there is such a spectrum, like with Pilates, it's a little more straightforward. With Tai Chi, it's a little more, you kind of know what they're getting. Of course, there's always variables and different teachers and different styles of things, but it's a little bit more straightforward. But with yoga, there's such a broad variety of tools that can be used. So, when I first started seeing patients in my Chinese medicine practice, when I lived in Portland, I had a nice group of people that I refer people to, and a lot of the healthcare providers that I worked with were really interested in yoga and really wanted to be able to refer people to it. And, so I was kind of chewing on this, and I was leading teacher trainings at the time and wanting to bridge that gap. And really for me, I mean, it's really our purpose at Yoga Medicine is to train our teachers to a deeper level so that they can interact with the healthcare providers and provide a therapeutic resource by being able to individualize the practice. And so for me, that's that's the role that we've played. That was the best way that I could find to bridge that gap for people. Now we have like tens of thousands of teachers around the world. So it's a little bit more realistic that people can type in their postal code and find someone near them. Or now we have online so people can find people online. But I would say like a quarter of the teachers in our teaching community too are also healthcare providers of some sort. So that could be mental health. We have surgeons, anesthesiologists. We have ER docs, primary care docs. So we have a broad variety, and some use it with their patients. Some also teach yoga. I know there's always a few that are just really interested and curious and want to learn more and end up teaching maybe at some point. But yeah, for me, that's the only way to bridge the gap that I can personally attain is being able to really provide these resources of people who really understand how to meet the individual.
Have you had, when you set up the brand name Yoga Medicine, was there ever any kind of blowback or negative comments on that, and kind of how did you respond to that at all?
No, not that I can think of. No.
Just for context, right? The reason I'm asking that is maybe it's a different interpretation in the UK, but there is maybe problems in the past where yoga teachers have kind of acted like doctors, and then if they're not familiar with you, like I'm just thinking someone cold, not familiar with you, think, oh, yoga medicine. Is that a medical? Are they qualified doctors and alike? So I just wondered if you've had any reaction to that. That name.
No, but I'm so super clear that it's not our job to be their healthcare provider. And that's the slippery slope, right? Like we're training them like in our shoulder or hip module, whatever. We're talking about the anatomy and the joint structure and the function, but we're also talking about common injuries. We're taking them through an evaluation. So there is this sense of like feeling like they could be in control of their healthcare. And so I'm so super clear that you're not a healthcare provider. In fact, in America, I think, years ago, the only cases of liability issues against yoga teachers were when they thought they were a healthcare provider. They had been like in a chiropractor's office or something like that, and they assumed that they were a doctor and had hurt themselves. So, I think it's really clear. And I also think that it's really important to, we used to have these trainings and I'd have people go home where there was always a handful of people who wanted to go on into some healthcare specialty, like go to med school or go to acupuncture school. And, over the years, I feel like how I've taught maybe has changed a little bit too, but I think we really need to honor and protect this role of a teacher that doesn't have to be anything more than that, that can live in the mystery with people, that doesn't have to have all the answers, that, yes, has a thorough understanding of the body to be able to kind of like adapt and adjust, to the individual, but can really honor and respect the fact that they don't need to know it all. They don't need to have the answers. They're not a doctor. They're not there to diagnose. They're not there to treat, but there's such an important supportive modality along this journey, because most doctors only spend five minutes maybe with their patients. Even physical therapists are lucky to get like 10 sessions. And so as a yoga teacher, we get to spend so much more time and fill a very important gap in the medical system that is really about, this comes full circle, the journey and all the other parts about our health that our healthcare doesn't look at. The joy, the gratitude, the contentment, the appreciation of the energetic systems that are so important that we can't quantify.
And that is medicine. Joy, gratitude. That is a form of medicine, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So you found yoga very young. I think you were early teens, weren't you? 14? Yeah. So I'm curious, have you kept up an asana practice all that time? And how has it sort of changed and evolved? Not just your asana, but your spiritual practice. How has your yoga practice evolved over the years?
So much. And I think that's the only thing that's probably mandatory. Well, not mandatory. Everyone's journey is different, and I can appreciate that. But from what I've seen as a teacher, I think the biggest place people get stuck if they practice over several decades of their life is feeling like they need to stick with one thing. You see that, I'm sure you see this too, like the people who like have to go back and do this specific, whatever practice it is, Bikram, Ashtanga, yin, even yin, like it could be any of those. And yeah, mine's changed a lot. I think I've learned to take the pressure off feeling like I have to practice, because I know when I feel like I have to, it takes the joy out of it for me. But I also know how much it changes my life. And so even every day. So for me, I just like to find something every day. Usually it's an hour practice and involves movement because I'm at my computer a lot these days. Yeah. But, some days that might be more myofascial release or pranayama or meditation. I think it's important to take the guilt away. I know when I first started, I did my first teacher training at the Expanding Light, the Ananda Institute, which is very different than how I teach now. And, it was I was 16 at the time, and it was kind of like mandatory to meditate for an hour or two a day. Wow. And I had this kind of ingrained in me, like I had to do it. And after like a year, I just was like, I can't do this anymore. I kept teaching and practicing yoga, but I stopped meditating until I found that I wanted to come back to it. And I did a Vipassana retreat and fell in love with it. And, and that changed things. But for me, I think I found that really on, that if I force myself to do something, it really takes a lot of the joy out of it. And because yoga is my joy and my hobby and my work and my everything, I don't want that to happen.
What do you do for fun? Like what non-yoga, non-work related stuff do you do for fun?
For fun. Yeah, I know. I had a boyfriend who gave me a really hard time because I didn't have hobbies. And I was like, he was a yoga teacher actually. And I was like, it kind of got under my skin because I thought like, why do I have to have a hobby? I love my job. Anyways, for fun, I just getting outside, going for a hike, going skiing, spending time with my partner, watching a movie, cooking. I like to cook. I go through phases of cooking.
Well, on that note, would you recommend that most yogis, asana practitioners, do something else, but do another movement modality? Would you say that's important? And if so, kind of what perhaps is considered missing in typical yoga? Now, of course, there are extremes. Like if someone just does yin, they need some strength building. But let's say someone does a smorgasbord of yoga. What would you say? What activities might be beneficial for their body? Would you say?
I think it really just depends on what's important to the person. It's so easy these days to, look online and hear things, especially with the fitness world blending into yoga a lot now, and always feel like we need to do more. Now, I do think as we get older, we know that muscle strength declines, especially, past your 40s and 50s and so on. So I think it's easy just to go in and do some weightlifting. But there's so many different ways to train your body. If you really look at like if I want to optimize my physical body and train it to the highest capacity, like I've worked with a lot of professional athletes, like there's so many things to look at, and it can literally consume your whole day, right? To not just train the muscular tissue, but the connective tissue, and then the cardiovascular health, and then on and on and on and on, nutrition. And there's so much. So I think there's a contentment with knowing that, yoga can be enough if you're looking for ways to challenge yourself. Obviously, if I'm just doing a really gentle practice, I'm probably going to need, especially as I get older, some strength work and maybe some cardiovascular challenges. But I think the way to summarize it, the easiest, is just to remember that your body is trained to what you do. And so train for what you love, and, find what is important and works for you. And that might change a lot.
I'm wondering what your thoughts are on enjoying exercise, because this is where Adam and I differ. I cannot. Adam would say, you need to do some cardio, get in the shed and get on the bike and do 20 minutes. And I don't want to.
This sounds like a slightly abusive relationship here. That's not. Holly has not once gone and did any cardio.
No, but if I do cardio, it has to be like an hour of dance or something that I enjoy. I cannot just do exercise for the sake of getting my body stronger. It has to have some kind of joy. Otherwise, I just feel like it's a waste of time. Whereas Adam's like, no, I know I need to get stronger. This is how I'm going to get stronger if I do this,
just
and that.
To balance that out, like for me, most of my learning about myself, and I've done yoga for a very long time, but most of my learning has been through long distance endurance stuff. It's like a microcosm of life. Like running 100 kilometers, you go through a lot.
And then she's there playing sound bowls and learning.
Yeah, loving life, just like woo.
in another dimension.
Yeah, I learn a lot there, and I'm fine.
I mean, I've swung so far back and forth in this realm, especially being in sports medicine and working with athletes. And, now I just feel like life is precious and you need to really do what you love. And yes, if you're sitting all day, you need to do something to move. And I really believe as a healthcare provider, like we know that movement is such an important thing for every basically health disease or scenario. We know how important that is for so many reasons. So I think because of that, my translation is, I think, kind of like you said, Holly, is I really think people need to find something they love, because, and in Chinese medicine, the enjoyment of exercise is actually really important for the liver as well, which is kind of like what moves and regulates that flow through the body and is so important for our stress regulation. And so through a Chinese medicine lens, it's very important that you find movement and activities that you enjoy. Like I worked at Nike for 7 years, and I just remember so many people would come in, and be like, oh, I need to lose weight. I need to get back into running. And they were like, I've got to get back into running. And I'm like, well, if you love running, great, do it. But if you don't, there's plenty of other ways to, feel healthier, get better, and also I think changing that mindset of like, having to lose weight versus wanting to be healthy and feel good.
Totally, yeah.
And if you change that lens and find, like, dance is a great way to stimulate cardiovascular system, your brain. It's so good because you're learning new movements and coordinating them, which is similar with yoga too, I think, and kind of the flowy choreographed flows that we do are very great for the mind and the brain connection. So,
man, I'm speaking about yoga. I just miss it now because obviously I haven't really done. I mean, I've tried a few classes, and Sonny just wakes up crying when he's asleep upstairs. So I have to go up and miss the whole class. So I really miss being on the mat. Oh.
I read, just to drop the name of a book in, I read a book called Exercised recently. I think it's by like a Harvard professor. It's a new release, and talking a big chunky book just about kind of exercise theory, mass market, but still a chunky book. And one thing that reading that really prompted me is that actually a lot of the exercise I'm doing now is to be healthy. Like the impetus is actually I want to live a long time. Optimally, no, I don't want to live long, like in a wheelchair for the last 20 years of my life. I want to live a long time optimally for the sake of my son. And to be healthy for that. And that's motivation for me now. And also slightly to be like a superhero for him.
No.
The health span. Not lifespan,
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit? We kind of alluded to it earlier, the importance of being aware of your own ignorance, as it were. Like the limits of your knowledge, I think is a super important skill. And I think to some degree there is an increasing death of expertise, like an unwillingness to listen to experts in the world. And, you only need to go.
Really?
Yeah, massively. Certainly. And people, I think often people think that their opinion, having read a few newspaper articles, is sometimes as valid as a person that's studied that topic for years.
Is this social media you're seeing this?
Well, no, just all over. There is actually a wonderful book that was written a few years ago called The Death of Expertise that tackles this. And I'm a firm believer. I want to always refer to experts. Like, I always try my best to say, actually, I don't want to have a strong opinion on this because I in no way know enough about it. But I think it's much like anyone can call themselves a nutritionist. That's in the UK at least. There was no body saying who can be a nutritionist. Someone could do a 200-hour course. Someone could study it for 5 years. Someone could do a 5-hour course and call themselves a nutritionist.
Yoga teachers too.
Well, indeed, yeah. And so I think that is very problematic to some degree, and I do think people need to be encouraged to acknowledge the limits of their knowledge. And I guess my question there was more about your students, when you send them out to the world to be teachers. How would you get them, or what's the advice, when a student says to them, okay, I've got back pain, how can I deal with this? What can I do with that? Do you say to them, actually, what you should do is get that person just to go to a physio or go to a doctor? Or do you get them to work with that person on a one-on-one level? Or like my general strategy is, how can I make it not hurt in yoga? And, if it really persists, maybe see a doctor or a physio or a healthcare professional. But if a yoga teacher tells you quickly what you need to do to solve your back pain, ignore them. It's the general advice, yeah.
Oh my God, I feel like there's so many different directions I wanted to go with what you just said. And I don't know where I'm going to end up going. But I agree. I think it's so important. And I think the only time I get nervous about teachers who graduate, and it's pretty rare now, I feel like yoga medicine teachers, I think, are kind of known for being not only good resources, but also very humble and open-minded and really knowing how important it is to work with the medical system and not instead of it. Obviously, there's students who are going to refuse medical care and want to do things their own way, and that happens. But I think it is important to know our limitations. The tricky part is you have to know a little bit to know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's a dedication to continuing to learn and kind of staying open to the mystery and knowing that we don't know. And it's important. And I think, for all those teachers who have imposter syndrome, I think imposter syndrome is a very important thing. It reminds you, it humbles you and keeps you searching and learning. And you should be experiencing that because we don't know it all. And, as far as experts go, I think they're so precious and so important to have, because without experts in any study, like now, medicine is so specialized. It's almost hard to be a GP. It's like a general practitioner. It's like you have to know so much. But the other thing is when you start talking to specialists, people who are researching one field their whole lives, like oftentimes I'll talk to scientists or research. I was talking to one guy at the Department of Placebo at Harvard and all the studies he had done. And I was like, I want you to come. And he was going to lead a talk for yoga medicine, which didn't end up happening. It was a long time ago. I want you to come and talk about the power of the mind. He's like, oh no, I can't talk to that. I don't study that. Because researchers and specialists are so focused. They have the horse blinders on to only seeing this thing. And so that's why it's beautiful to see like integrative medicine providers coming up that are looking at the whole body. But it's so hard. It's so hard to get that big picture perspective because the specialists go so deep, which is why, in our trainings, we go like really deep into each area, like lymphatics or nervous system or shoulder, or just go deep and then come back out the other side and keep looking at the big picture. But, when people have pain, I mean, for us, we have like a course that people do that's called red flags. So they know when to refer out. And it's pretty straightforward, but I think, part of our intake is asking if they've seen a doctor, if they've had treatments, if they've had a diagnosis. And, anytime there's red flags, making sure that you're encouraging them to go and see someone else. I think that's really important, helpful, because there is so much that yoga can do. However, it's not a cure-all.
It's kind of related. what are your thoughts on at the start of class saying, has anyone got any injuries?
It's such a loaded question because the reality is, if I have people who have injuries, am I going to change my whole practice? One. And two, like you said, if someone comes up and is like, I have low back pain, I always joke in our courses, like at the end of this, it's going to be like impossible for you to answer that because there's no way of knowing. And after seeing thousands of low back patients, because that's what I've seen a lot of in my career, there's definitely some commonalities that we can draw. And it's really helpful to provide these resources of like 3 poses for your low back pain, so that people can try it out and find things who don't have the privilege of being able to pay for, have the time for privates, or have someone near them. So I think it's helpful. It makes it accessible. However, the reality is there's no way of knowing, like to be like, oh, do this for your back pain. Like, well, there's 500,000 other things that might be helpful too. Maybe it's just the mind.
My view is that if you were to ask, you're going to say the same thing to people anyway, which are going to don't do anything that hurts. Just adapt to
Oh yeah, sorry, the injuries. Yeah.
And my view
you're not going to change your whole class. And I don't know if I've got a hamstring injury and a back injury and a shoulder injury. One, how am I going to know, like, is their shoulder injury like they can't weight bear on their hands? Am I going to do a whole class of non-weight bearing? Is it just that they can't come into Gomu, or they have trouble going into Gomukhasana? Like, there's such a broad. Yeah, I agree. I don't ask that at the beginning. If people come up to me like I have low back pain, like I'll give them some suggestions of things to pay attention to. Or after class, I always find it really helpful. Like if someone comes up after class and is like, "Oh, that was so helpful." Great. Like tune into whatever it was that, you engaged or were, because it's not usually a pose, right? It's like maybe a new way of thinking.
On that, there's one, I think just for teachers out there, so kind of it is a slight liability risk as well, in that if I'm a student and I've told you my injury, whatever that might be, like I've got a Lisfranc rupture. Like, number one, you probably don't know what it is anyway, particularly. You wouldn't know how to look after it. But at the same time, I think a real issue is if someone... I assume if I've told the teacher, they're going to look after me. And if I've as a teacher, if I've spoke to like 6 blonde girls wearing the same Lululemon, I 100% have forgot who's got what going on. And so and then they injure themselves and they assume that I was looking after them because I asked about their injury and said that I would.
Agree. I totally agree. And I think for me, the most important thing is empowering people to be their own teacher. And like, I think we get into trouble when we start to come into this guru mentality of like, it's hard because, there is a comfort in a teacher just telling you what to do. However, it doesn't leave that space for people to find their own way. So for me, it's a really gray balance of being able to, one, empower people so that they know that there are always the options to modify and adjust as they need and listen to their body. And that is by far the most important. But then sometimes being really specific about how to do things can be calming to the nervous system. And sometimes offering a lot of options can be really helpful. Like, I think there's a place for both. And as a teacher, like if you give options on everything, it just leaves everyone like
confused,
a little confused.
Should we do?
Yeah.
I was just going to say, should we do some quick fire questions?
Yeah, we're going to do some quick fires now because time is flying.
It's gone so quickly.
Just before we do that, I just want to say that book that I mentioned, it's called Exercise. Just wanted to name check the guy. It's called Daniel Lieberman, who is a professor.
Oh, yeah.
You know him?
He's an excellent presenter. He was a keynote presenter at a couple of the fascia conferences. He's amazing.
The book's so well written. It's entertaining, which is surprising considering the content and how deep it goes. It's surprising, and I think it's a relatively recent book. But yeah, quick fires. Fire away, Holly.
We'll put it in the show notes. You asked your community a question on Instagram, so I'd like to reflect it back to you, and that is, what makes you feel most alive?
Connecting with other people, connecting with my breath, connecting with myself. Feeling that, I think I say this a lot in Shavasana, is like feeling what's alive in me makes me feel alive, which is kind of redundant, I guess.
That's perfect.
Are there any recovery tools that people could purchase that might help them in either their yoga practice or just in their body, like little accessories they could buy?
Well, I'm a big fan of myofascial release, so I actually made I designed, it's their product, recovery balls with rad rollers, and they're softer and a little smaller than most myofascial balls, which is really nice for helping to rejuvenate the tissues rather than just like lacrosse balls for breaking up scar tissue, in quotes. In quotes. I'm a big fan of that. I love foam rollers, softer ones for recovery. Even just like a couple of minutes of deep diaphragmatic breathing can be a great recovery tool at the end of a intense workout session, which is fun.
What are you grateful for today?
I'm grateful for my husband and my family and my ability to move and breathe and do what I love and have this community that I love too.
Beautiful.
And can you tell us a little bit about any upcoming trainings? It doesn't need to be quick fire, go into it as much as you want, but any upcoming trainings and where to find you.
Well, we have a brand new training coming out on lymphatics, which is an area that is very poorly studied and poorly understood, and also almost never talked about, I think, in the yoga realm. So we talk on that, and we have a breast cancer surgeon for like 30 some years teaching about lymphedema and working with lymphedema. I have a TCM course coming up. What else?
TCM,
There's always
as in traditional Chinese medicine.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Right. There's the interpretation. You know, that happens sometimes. Yes. I have books. We have all of our teacher trainings online now. So anything from the nervous system to yin and meditation to lymphatics to shoulder, hip, spine, fascia, functional anatomy, MFR. I'm sure I'm missing some, but there's a bunch. Trauma.
And
female health, which is again another topic that is
what? Email health.
Like
email health.
Female fee with an F.
You wouldn't understand.
What is this productivity thing you're talking about?
Yes.
And where can people find you? What's your Instagram, your website?
Yeah, it's all Yoga Medicine. YogaMedicine.com is everything from practice to trainings and books. And then on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, it's Yoga Medicine. I think it's yoga_medicine.
And you have a personal one as well, don't you? But you share
I do.
Yoga content. Not personal as in seeing your personal life, but it is kind of yoga content.
It's more personal. Yeah. It's a little more personal.
I disagree. I've heard some, with the lymph thing, I've heard some wonderful teaching about handstands and draining the lymphatic system. That's the most I've ever heard. It's that awful instruction.
It's definitely one of many ways to support it. Yeah. There's so many.
Yeah, I think that's one of those. That's one of those parroting thing, isn't it? That people just hear that one teacher say it at one point and just keep saying it.
Honestly, I would love to see some research come on vibration and the sound bath and stuff for lymphatics. Because one of the things I love to use is a chi machine, which is basically you lay down and you put your ankles in it and it rocks them back and forth.
Oh, how nice!
It's just this little vibration, but this is my opinion, but like. It's basically just creating that vibration. We can create it in yoga. There's ways to create that vibration. Sound baths are creating that vibration in the body, which is helping to encourage that coherence. And it would be interesting to see how it influences lymphatics. I don't know of any research. I doubt there is any, but
I'm going to have a look at that. Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much.
It's been such a pleasure to chat, and hopefully when you're in London, we'll catch you. I've always meant to over the years, but never quite had a chance to do it.
I'm like a September London goer usually for teaching. So
try yoga. Hopefully we'll see you in try yoga at some point next year.
Yes, and thank you for having me. I love having the conversations and just getting to chat a little with some teachers.
Honestly unbalanced.